The fragile truce that has held the British Constitution together for centuries has finally shattered, and the consequences are immediate, terrifying, and irreversible. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has crossed a line that no leader in modern history has dared to approach, plunging the nation into a confrontation that threatens the very existence of the United Kingdom's governance. What began as whispers of friction between Downing Street and Buckingham Palace has exploded into open warfare, broadcast to a stunned nation that now watches its democracy teeter on the edge of the abyss. This is no longer a political dispute. It is a regime crisis. The unwritten contract between the Crown and the executive, the bedrock of British stability, has been torn apart in a calculated act of defiance that has left constitutional experts breathless and the public in a state of alarm. The flashpoint arrived not in the chaos of the House of Commons, but in the terrifying silence of a scheduled audience that went catastrophic. In a scene that will be analyzed by historians for decades, the Prime Minister reportedly refused a direct constitutional instruction from King Charles III, effectively declaring the executive branch independent of the monarchy's oversight. Sources close to the palace describe the atmosphere as ice-cold and terminal. The Prime Minister didn't merely disagree, he reportedly informed the monarch that the government would no longer recognize the customary powers of royal assent on specific key legislation. It was a moment of absolute rupture. The king, holding the weight of a 1,000-year institution, was met not with the deference of a prime minister, but with the cold arrogance of a leader who believes he has outgrown the system that put him in power. This was not a lapse in protocol, it was a declaration of supremacy.
The reaction from the machinery of the state was instantaneous and panicked. Civil servants, bound by oaths to the crown, yet employed by the government, froze in their tracks. Cabinet secretaries scrambled to intercept the fallout, but the damage was already done. The news broke not through an official press release, but through the terrifying silence that descended upon Westminster. Routine briefings were cancelled. Senior aides vanished from their desks. The realization rippled through London. The Prime Minister is effectively governing without the consent of the head of state. It is a scenario for which there is no modern playbook, only ancient laws and emergency powers that have gathered dust for centuries. The illusion of stability has evaporated, replaced by the stark reality of a power struggle that leaves the British people as hostages in a battle for the soul of the state. But then the true scale of the betrayal began to emerge. Leaked reports from within the Cabinet Office suggest this was not a spontaneous argument, but the first move in a premeditated strategy to fundamentally alter the British state. This was an ambush. The Prime Minister's team had reportedly been wargaming this exact scenario for months, calculating exactly how far they could push the crown before the system fractured. They banked on the king's reluctance to intervene, weaponizing the monarch's neutrality against him. It is a gamble of breathtaking recklessness, one that risks burning down the institutions of state to save a failing administration. The public is waking up to a terrifying question. If the Prime Minister will not listen to the king, who is left to stop him?
The fallout has been catastrophic. As the details of the confrontation spilled into the public domain, the veneer of orderly government collapsed. Emergency alerts flashed across news screens, and social media became a battleground of confusion and outrage. The pound plummeted as global markets reacted to the spectacle of a G7 nation effectively entering a constitutional void. This is not just a bad week for the government. It is the beginning of a meltdown that threatens to paralyze the nation, leaving Britain without a functioning command structure as the Prime Minister barricades himself in number 10 and the King prepares to defend the throne. What makes this situation truly chilling is not just the act of defiance itself, but the dark machinery revealed behind it. As the initial shock of the confrontation settles, a torrent of leaks has begun to expose the rot at the heart of Starmer's operation. These are not rumors, they are time-stamped documents, internal memos, and encrypted messages that paint a picture of a government operating like a rogue state within its own borders. The public is now seeing the blueprints of a silent coup designed to strip the monarchy of its reserve powers and consolidate absolute authority within the Prime Minister's inner circle. The evidence is damning, detailed, and undeniable. One particularly explosive leak, verified by senior Whitehall sources, details a secret working group established under the innocuous title Modernization Committee. Its true purpose, however, appears to have been the systematic dismantling of the checks and balances that limit executive power. The documents outline a step-by-step plan to bypass the Privy Council, ignore royal prerogatives, and effectively render the monarch a silent hostage to the government's will. Notes from these meetings reveal a terrifying arrogance, with senior strategists referring to the crown not as a partner in governance, but as a legacy obstacle to be neutralized. They discuss the timing of this confrontation with the cold precision of demolition experts, looking for the moment when the king would be most vulnerable. And here is what makes it worse. The deception was active and ongoing. While public statements were praising the constructive relationship with the palace, private communications tell a story of hostility and contempt. Emails surfaced in which top aides mocked the constitutional conventions they were sworn to uphold, describing the need to break the transmission mechanism between the palace and the parliament. This was not a government drifting into crisis. It was a government engineering one. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew it would cause chaos, and they did it anyway, believing that the resulting confusion would allow them to seize more power in the vacuum. The betrayal of the ordinary voter is palpable. The people elected a prime minister to serve the country, not to wage war on its constitution. Yet the revelations show a leadership team obsessed not with the cost of living or the state of the NHS, but with their own survival and dominance. They have spent taxpayer money and government time plotting a constitutional heist. The sense of moral illegitimacy is spreading like a virus. How can a government claim to speak for the people when it is secretly plotting to dismantle the protections that keep the people safe from tyranny? The sheer scale of the duplicity has left the nation reeling. Even within the Labour Party, the dam is breaking. Backbenchers, terrified by the reckless trajectory of their leadership, are beginning to speak out off the record, describing a bunker mentality in Downing Street where dissent is punished and reality is ignored. They talk of a prime minister isolated from the country, listening only to a shrinking circle of sycophants who are urging him to double down. The party that promised to restore integrity is now being exposed as the architect of the greatest constitutional vandalism in living memory. The mask has slipped, and the face underneath is unrecognizable to the British public. The paralysis is now total. Westminster has ceased to function as a legislative body and has become a crime scene of political failure. The House of Commons is in a state of suspended animation, with MPs from all sides staring at their phones, waiting for the next tremor. The government's agenda is dead in the water. No bill can pass, no policy can be enacted, because the authority required to sign them into law is now an open conflict with the man trying to pass them. The gears of the state have ground to a halt, choked by the sand the Prime Minister has thrown into the engine. Outside the iron gates of Parliament, the mood has shifted from confusion to anger. Crowds are swelling by the hour, a mix of constitutionalists, royalists, and ordinary citizens who feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. The chants are loud, angry, and directed squarely at Number 10. They are not asking for a policy change. They are demanding to know if the government is even legal anymore. The police presence has tripled, lines of neon vests separating the people from the seat of power, creating visual confirmation of a government under siege from its own population. The air is thick with tension, the kind that precedes a riot. Inside the ministries, the confusion is absolute. Department heads are reportedly seeking legal counsel on whose orders they are actually supposed to follow. If the Prime Minister orders an action that the Crown has deemed unconstitutional, do they obey? The chain of command, usually so clear, has dissolved into a fog of uncertainty. Senior military figures have been spotted entering the Ministry of Defense for unscheduled meetings, fueling wild speculation about the role of the armed forces should the breakdown continue. The silence from the generals is deafening, a heavy, pregnant pause that screams of danger.
The opposition has smelled blood in the water. Reform UK and the Conservatives are united in a rare chorus of condemnation, labeling the Prime Minister's actions as dictatorial and treasonous. But even their attacks feel small compared to the magnitude of the crisis. This is bigger than party politics. It is a question of whether the system itself survives. Voices that usually call for calm are now screaming for action. Legal scholars are appearing on every news channel, their faces pale, explaining that we are in uncharted waters where the only map is the conscience of the king.
And then came the signal that changed everything. The silence from Buckingham Palace was broken not by a roar, but by a whisper that shook the foundations of London. Palace officials announced a sudden, indefinite postponement of the king's public engagements due to matters of state. It was a diplomatic phrase, but in the language of the monarchy, it was a siren. It meant the king had moved to a war footing. He is no longer performing ceremonies, he is preparing to act. The realization hit Westminster like a physical blow. The king is not backing down. He is preparing to use powers that have lain dormant since the Victorian era. The escalation is now vertical. Following the palace's signal, the atmosphere shifted from political crisis to constitutional emergency. Reports are flooding in that King Charles has summoned the Privy Council for an emergency session, not the ceremonial gathering usually seen, but a hardened operational meeting of the nation's supreme advisory body. Legal experts confirm that the monarch is receiving briefings on the reserve powers, the nuclear button of the British Constitution, which allows the dismissal of a prime minister who threatens the safety of the realm. The threat is no longer theoretical. It is sitting on a desk in Buckingham Palace. Panic has now seized the cabinet. The unity of the government is fracturing in real time. Ministers who were silent yesterday are now frantically briefing journalists, desperate to distance themselves from a prime minister who appears to be dragging them all off a cliff. Resignation letters are reportedly being drafted, not in ones and twos, but in batches. The collective responsibility of the cabinet has evaporated, replaced by a desperate scramble for political lifeboats. They know that if the king acts, anyone standing with the prime minister will be swept away by history. The prime minister's response has only poured gasoline on the fire. In a defiant late-night statement recorded from inside a bunker like Downing Street, Starmer refused to yield, framing the conflict as a battle between elected representatives and unelected privilege. But the tone was wrong, shrill, desperate, and defensive. It was not the voice of a confident leader. It was the voice of a man realizing he is trapped. He attempted to claim a mandate from the people, but the polls show the public is horrified, siding overwhelmingly with the stability of the crown over the chaos of the executive. His words rang hollow, bouncing off the walls of a nation that has stopped listening to him. Meanwhile, the institutions of the state are beginning to pick sides, and they are not choosing Downing Street. The Speaker of the House has issued a stern warning that Parliament will not be bypassed, effectively cutting off the Prime Minister's escape route through the legislature. The judiciary has signaled its readiness to hear emergency challenges to the government's authority. The walls are closing in from every side. The Prime Minister is discovering the hard way that the power of his office is borrowed, not owned, and the owner is coming to collect. Inside number 10, the mood is described as funeral. The loyalists who remain are wandering the halls like ghosts, knowing their careers are over. The phones have stopped ringing because no one wants to talk to a dead administration. The Prime Minister sits alone, the weight of his failure crushing down on him. Yet still he refuses to walk to the podium and end it. He is holding the country hostage to his own ego, dragging out the inevitable while the nation burns. It is a spectacle of pitiful, dangerous obstinacy. As night falls over a fearful capital, the questions hang heavy in the darkness. Will the Prime Minister force the king to fire him, creating a constitutional martyr myth for his followers? Will the police obey an order to remove him? Will the civil service simply stop obeying his commands tomorrow morning? The uncertainty is a physical weight on the chest of the nation. We are drifting into the unknown, stripped of our compass, waiting for the crash.
This is the moment history will remember. The moment when the system failed, when the trust was broken, and when the fate of British democracy came down to a test of wills between a temporary politician and an ancient throne. The outcome is no longer in doubt. The Prime Minister cannot survive this. But the cost of his removal may be the very stability of the kingdom itself. As the sun rises on what may be the most consequential day in modern British history, one thing is terrifyingly clear. The Britain we knew yesterday is gone. What rises from the ashes of this confrontation is a mystery that terrifies us all. The king is ready. The people are waiting. The end is here.